The auction barn was alive with noise and dust, the air thick with the restless shuffle of boots, the rasp of the auctioneer's chant, and the impatient huffs of animals penned too long. Bright overhead lamps cast a glare that made every flaw on the horses' hides more pronounced, scars, ribs, knots of tangled manes. The crowd leaned against rails, sharp-eyed and calculating, every gaze scanning for bargains or champions. It was a place of business, not compassion. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his hands stuffed into worn jacket pockets, trying to convince himself he was only there to observe. His farm back home was modest, and he could barely afford the feed for the animals already under his care. Yet auctions always pulled him in, as if the hum of voices and the sight of vulnerable creatures being bartered stirred something restless in him. He told himself he wouldn't bid. He couldn't bid. Still he stayed. The parade of horses came and went. A glossy bay stallion fetched a high price, sending murmurs of approval rippling through the audience. A sturdy draft horse, broad-shouldered and obedient, was claimed by a rancher with a satisfied nod. The air buzzed with easy transactions, the sort that match money to muscle without hesitation. Then, almost as if by accident, the next lot was let in. The shift in the crowd's reaction was immediate. Laughter, whispers, the shuffle of boots as people leaned in to see the spectacle. A handler tugged on a lead rope, and at the end of it stumbled the tiniest horse he had ever seen. Its legs were thin as kindling, trembling beneath the weight of a body far too frail. Ribs showed starkly against dull, patchy hair, and its mane hung like matted threads. Its eyes, too large for its narrow face, were hollow pools of fear, glancing about as if expecting a blow. The auctioneer cleared his throat, hesitated, then forced a grin. "Well, folks, here's something unusual. Not quite a pony, not quite a horse. A curiosity, let's say. Who'll give me 50 to start?" The crowd erupted in chuckles. A man in a wide hat called out, "I've seen dogs bigger than that." Another added, "Might as well sell it as a lawn ornament." The laughter rolled across the barn, harsh and careless, each sound striking the little creature like a stone. The man in the jacket felt his stomach tighten. He had seen neglected animals before, but something about this one struck deeper. The horse's ears twitched back at every jeer, its body recoiling though the rope kept it tethered. He caught himself leaning forward, breath shallow. He shouldn't care, not this much, not when he had no means to take on more responsibility. But he couldn't look away. The auctioneer tried again. "All right, who'll give me 25? Silence followed, punctuated by smirks. No one wanted it, not even for that. The handler shifted uncomfortably, tugging on the rope as the little horse swayed unsteadily. A memory flickered across the man's mind, himself as a boy, standing on the outskirts of a playground, hearing the laughter of others at his expense. Small, awkward, unwanted. The sting of rejection never truly left, not even now. He recognized that same humiliation in the animal before him, and the recognition struck with a force he hadn't expected. His hand lifted almost of its own accord. "I'll give you 20. The auctioneer blinked, then grinned with relief. "We've got 20, do I hear 25? But no voices followed, only more laughter. "Fools throwing money away," someone muttered. "That thing won't last a month." The man felt the burn of their words, but kept his chin steady. 20 then, he said firmly. The gavel struck wood. "Sold. To the gentleman in the back." And just like that it was done. He had purchased the smallest, weakest horse in the barn. He felt a mixture of dread and certainty roll through him. His decision made no sense, except that it did, in a way no logic could explain. As he walked forward, the handler shoved the rope into his hands with a smirk. "Good luck with that one." The little horse resisted at first, hooves scraping weakly against the packed dirt, then stumbled forward, nearly collapsing. The man tightened his grip, lowering his voice into something soft and steady. "Easy, easy now. You're all right." The laughter of the crowd trailed behind as he led the horse out of the ring, each step awkward and fragile. The barn's air shifted to the cool of late evening outside. Crickets sang, the horizon bruised with the last colors of sunset. Away from the mocking voices, he let out a slow breath. The horse trembled against him, sides heaving with exhaustion. Up close, he could see the scars etched into its thin body, the dull patches of hair, the eyes that spoke of too many battles lost. He crouched slightly, bringing himself nearer to its height. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" The words left him before he realized he'd spoken them. The horse blinked at him, ears twitching as if listening. A flicker of hope stirred inside him. Fragile, yes, but alive. He walked the horse toward the trailer, each step an effort. Doubt whispered with every pace. What if the crowd was right? What if this little creature was already too far gone? He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the way the horse leaned ever so slightly toward him, as if searching for an anchor. When they reached the trailer, he paused, letting the horse gather its strength. Its head hung low, nostrils flaring with labored breaths. Then, with a weak surge of will, it climbed the ramp. He steadied it, hand brushing the frail shoulder, voice calm. That's it. You're safe now. The word surprised him again. Safe. Could he truly promise that? He had little money, limited resources, and no grand plan. Yet standing there in the dim light, the fragile animal before him, he felt a vow take shape. He would not let this creature fade into nothing. He closed the trailer gate, the latch clicking softly. The sounds of the auction still echoed faintly behind him. Laughter, jeers, the hollow chant of the auctioneer, but they were distant now, already fading. What mattered was here in the quiet, in the fragile life he had chosen to protect. As he turned toward the driver's seat, he heard a thud. He spun, heart in his throat. The tiny horse had collapsed inside the trailer, legs folded awkwardly, sides shuddering. Panic surged through him. He hurried back, crouched beside it, hand pressed against the thin rib cage. The heartbeat was faint but present, fluttering like a fragile flame. For a long moment he stayed there, listening, feeling, willing it to keep beating. His jaw tightened, eyes fixed on the little creature. "Don't you dare give up," he whispered. "Not yet." The horse's eyes flickered open, glassy but aware. It blinked once slowly, as if acknowledging him. Relief coursed through him, though fear still clawed at the edges. He exhaled shakily, determination hardening in his chest. This was no accident. He knew it then. The horse had been meant to fall into his hands, no matter how absurd the circumstances. And though he had no clear path ahead, one truth anchored him. He would fight for this life, no matter the cost. The engine of the trailer rumbled to life. Night had fully fallen, the sky draped in indigo. He climbed behind the wheel, hands steady now despite the storm inside him. The road stretched dark and uncertain, but it was theirs to travel together. Behind him, in the shadowed trailer, a tiny heartbeat kept time with the hum of the wheels. Fragile, faint, but refusing to quit. And so their journey began. The road home stretched long and silent, the hum of the engine filling the night while his thoughts churned louder than any machine. He glanced into the rearview mirror more times than he could count, catching only glimpses of the frail form lying in the trailer. Each time, a wave of worry pressed heavier on his chest. What if the horse didn't survive the journey? What if his impulsive decision had condemned it rather than save it? The doubts gnawed, yet beneath them throbbed an iron thread of resolve. He had made a promise, whispered into the dark, and he meant to keep it. By the time he pulled into his farmyard, the clock had ticked past midnight. His property was humble, fences sagged in places, the barn bore weathered boards, and the pasture was far from lush. Still, it was a place of honesty, where hard work mattered more than appearances. He killed the engine, stepped into the cool night air, and listened. The crickets sang, the distant hoot of an owl echoed, and from the trailer came the faint, irregular sound of breathing. He hurried to open the latch, heart thudding. The tiny horse hadn't moved far, still folded awkwardly on the wooden floor. Its chest rose and fell shallowly, nostrils flaring as he approached. He knelt, speaking low, "You're home now. I know it doesn't look like much, but it's safe here." The words felt clumsy, yet necessary, as though spoken promises could weave a net strong enough to catch the fragile life before him. He coaxed gently, urging the horse to its feet. It struggled, legs wobbling, hoofs scraping, until finally it stood, swaying as though a single gust might topple it again. Slowly, step by step, he guided it down the ramp and into the barn. The lantern's glow cast long shadows across the stalls, illuminating dust motes swirling like tired stars. He had prepared a small pen with fresh straw, though it looked meager compared to what stronger animals required. For this one, it felt like a sanctuary. When the horse finally lay down on the bedding, exhaustion overcoming it, he sank onto an overturned bucket nearby. The smell of hay, wood, and old leather surrounded him, grounding him in the familiarity of the place. Yet nothing about tonight felt familiar. He had taken on something far more delicate, far more uncertain, than any animal he had tended before. He studied the tiny horse, seeing beyond the skeletal frame and dull coat. He saw a survivor, a spark buried deep within weakness. The hours slipped past in a haze of watchfulness. He offered water in a shallow pan, waited until tentative lips brushed it, then felt relief as a few sips were taken. He offered a handful of softened grain, which at first was ignored, then sampled with hesitant nibbles. Each small victory struck like a flare in the dark, fragile proof that perhaps survival was possible. But survival was not simple. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of care. He rose earlier than usual, checked the horse before tending to anything else. He cleaned the wounds hidden beneath patches of rough hair, brushed away dirt with patient strokes, and spoke in tones softer than he thought his voice could manage. At first, the horse flinched at every movement, pressing back against the stall walls as if expecting cruelty. The man learned to slow his gestures, to let silence stretch between them until trust edged forward 1 inch at a time. Neighbors soon noticed the new addition. They leaned on the fence posts, squinting at the frail creature with doubtful eyes. "That's what you brought home from the auction?" one asked with a laugh. "Looks more like a shadow than a horse." Another shook his head, pity mingling with mockery. "You're wasting your time. Best thing would be to cut your losses before that thing keels over." The words cut, but he kept his expression steady. He had been underestimated before, told he wasn't strong enough, not clever enough, not worth the effort. Those memories rose unbidden, but instead of crushing him, they hardened his resolve. He would not abandon this life, no matter how many scoffed. He had already seen the faint spark in the horse's eyes, and that was enough. The bond between them deepened in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. One evening, after hours spent cleaning the stall and coaxing the horse to eat, he leaned against the wooden rail, exhaustion heavy in his limbs. The horse, usually wary, stepped closer. It hesitated, then lowered its head, resting it lightly against his arm. The touch was feather-soft, almost uncertain, but it rooted him to the spot. He swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden sting in his eyes. That simple gesture spoke louder than words, a moment of trust freely given, fragile yet monumental. Not every day was filled with progress. There were nights the horse refused food, days when weakness returned, and it seemed as though each breath was a battle. Once he found the horse shivering violently despite the warm air, and panic gripped him. He stayed awake until dawn, wrapping the animal in blankets, whispering reassurance, refusing to leave its side. When morning came and the shivers eased, he felt both drained and renewed, as though he had faced a trial alongside it and survived together. Weeks passed, and slowly, undeniably, change began to show. The horse's coat gained a faint sheen under the brush. Its eyes, once dulled and clouded, began to reflect light again. The trembling steps grew steadier, though still delicate. He saw resilience emerging like green shoots through frost. And with each sign of strength, his own heart seemed to mend in ways he hadn't realized it needed. Yet shadows remained. His farm struggled under financial weight, and whispers from neighbors grew sharper. They called him foolish, said he was throwing his livelihood away. Their words struck harder on days when feed bills piled high and fatigue weighed down his body. Alone in the barn, listening to the horse's quiet breaths, he sometimes asked himself if he had made a mistake. But then the horse would lift its head, gaze meeting his with quiet intensity, and the doubts would fall silent. There was meaning here, something worth every sacrifice. The world had discarded this creature, branded it useless, but it had seen the truth. Strength was not always loud, beauty not always obvious. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire and gold, he led the tiny horse from its stall into the pasture. For weeks, it had only known the confines of the barn. Now, for the first time, the open space stretched before it. At first the horse hesitated, legs stiff, head swiveling as if overwhelmed by the vastness. He stood by patiently, hand resting lightly on the rope, offering no pressure, only presence. Then, with a sudden burst of determination, the horse stepped forward. Its stride was awkward, halting, but undeniably forward. Step by step, it crossed the grass, sniffed the air, even lifted its head to the breeze. The sight caught his breath. Here was a creature once mocked, once too weak to stand, now daring to explore the world again. He let go of the rope, heart thudding, and the horse didn't falter. Instead, it took another step, and another, until it stood in the glow of the dying sun, fragile yet defiant. The moment was small, quiet, but to him it felt like a triumph echoing louder than any applause. As shadows lengthened, he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with hardship and doubt, but tonight had shown him a glimpse of what might be possible. The little horse had found its footing. Now, together, they would learn to stand against whatever the world placed before them. And as he closed the barn doors that evening, the promise he had made at the auction deepened, not out of desperation, but out of hope. This was no lost cause. This was a story just beginning to rise. The mornings had begun to carry a different rhythm. Where once he would step into the barn with dread, fearing he might find the tiny horse collapsed or fading, now he entered with cautious anticipation. Each day seemed to bring a subtle change, a shift in posture, a light in the eyes that hadn't been there before. The horse rose more quickly now when he came near, its legs still delicate but no longer trembling with every attempt. It was healing, yes, but more than that, it was awakening. He started to guide it beyond the stall, coaxing it into the pasture for longer stretches. At first, the movements were clumsy, uneven steps across the grass, a stumble here and there that sent his heart into his throat. But each time, the horse recovered, lifting its head as though refusing to surrender to weakness again. He matched its pace, never rushing, offering steady encouragement with the kind of patience born only from belief. The neighbors noticed the change too, though not all with admiration. Some leaned on the fence line, muttering about how effort was wasted on a runt that would never grow into usefulness. Others laughed openly when they saw him leading the horse in slow circles, calling it a toy or vanity project. Their words carried the sting of derision, but by now he had built an armor against such judgment. What mattered was not their approval, but the bond forming between him and the creature they had already dismissed. Still, doubt found its way into quiet moments. Late at night, staring at ledgers filled with unpaid bills, he wondered whether he had tied his fate to a hopeless dream. His farm needed strong animals, reliable workers, not fragile companions. The thought weighed heavy, but then he would remember the way the horse leaned gently into his touch, or the glint in its eye when the wind stirred its mane. Those reminders were enough to silence the doubts, at least until morning. Training began not as a grand plan, but as necessity. The horse needed purpose, a way to grow stronger, and he needed proof, to himself, to the world, that this fragile life could endure. He started small. Each day, he walked the horse around the pasture, increasing the distance step by step. He taught it to follow subtle signals, the shift of a hand, the sound of his voice. At first, the horse resisted, ears twitching nervously, legs stuttering. But slowly, hesitantly, it responded. The first time it obeyed a command without faltering, a thrill surged through him, pride mixing with awe. As the weeks stretched into months, the routine deepened. He rose before dawn, preparing feed and water, then led the horse through exercises. The movements grew smoother, more confident. The horse learned to trot short distances, its gait still unsteady, but determined. He found himself speaking constantly to it, words of encouragement, soft murmurs of reassurance, as though the act of voicing belief could help shape reality. The horse listened, ears flicking toward his voice, body gradually shedding its frailty for the beginnings of strength. It wasn't easy. There were days when progress seemed to vanish, when fatigue dragged the horse into stubborn stillness, or a misstep ended in a tumble. Each setback threatened to undo him, fear whispering that the neighbors had been right. Yet each time, he reminded himself of the first night, the faint heartbeat he had felt beneath his hand. That heartbeat had fought then, and it fought still. He refused to give up when the creature itself had not. One afternoon, as the sun blazed over the fields, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. Out stepped a man older than him, with skin weathered by years outdoors and eyes sharp as a hawk's. It was Mr. Harlan, a horseman with a reputation that stretched across counties. He had trained champions, judged competitions, and rarely wasted time on what he deemed hopeless cases. He leaned against a fence, watching as the younger man guided the tiny horse in a slow trot. "That's the one you brought from the auction?" Harlan asked, his voice rough with skepticism. "Yes," he replied simply, sweat dampening his shirt. Harlan's gaze lingered, unreadable. "Doesn't look like much." "Didn't look like much when I found it either," he answered, meeting the older man's eyes. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Harlan gave a single nod, almost imperceptible. "Keep at it. Sometimes the ones everyone overlooks surprise you." Without another word, he returned to his truck and drove away, leaving behind nothing but dust and the echo of his unexpected advice. The words stayed with him. They weren't encouragement exactly, but they weren't dismissal either. They were possibility, and that was enough. By late summer, transformation had become undeniable. The horse's coat gleamed under sunlight, no longer patchy, but smooth. Its steps, once faltering, now carried a rhythm, fragile but purposeful. It was still the smallest horse anyone had seen, but no longer pitiful. There was pride in the way it held its head, resilience in every movement. One evening, after a long day of work, he released the horse into the pasture, without a lead. For a heartbeat, it hesitated, then broke into a run. The sight stole his breath. The once crippled creature now raced across the field, mane whipping, legs carrying it with surprising grace. It was not fast, not compared to larger horses, but it was free. Watching it, he felt something swell in his chest, fierce and uncontainable. This was why he had fought through exhaustion, why he had endured mockery and doubt. This moment justified it all. Yet joy was soon tempered by a new thought. If this horse could come this far, perhaps it deserved a chance to be seen, not as a joke or a burden, but as proof of resilience. The idea grew quietly at first, then rooted itself firmly in his mind. The county fair was approaching. Every year, horses were showcased, judged, celebrated. It was where reputations were made and lost. The notion seemed absurd. He imagined the laughter, the ridicule, the dismissive waves of the judges. But he also imagined the horse stepping into the arena, not trembling in fear but standing tall, defiant against the odds. He imagined silence falling over the crowd, surprise etched into every face as they realized what this tiny survivor had become. That night, lying awake, he turned the thought over and over. Fear clawed at him, fear of failure, of humiliation, of proving the doubters right. But beneath that fear pulsed determination. He hadn't fought this far to keep the horse hidden away. It deserved its moment no matter the outcome. He rose with the dawn, decision firm. Training would no longer be just about survival or strength. It would be about preparation, about standing before the world and proving that even the smallest, most broken creature could command respect. He stepped into the barn, the tiny horse lifting its head to greet him. For a moment, they studied each other, and he swore he saw understanding flicker in its eyes. He reached out, resting his hand on its neck. "We've got more work ahead," he whispered, "but I think we're ready." Outside, the fairgrounds awaited in the near future, filled with challenges and jeers yet to come. But for the first time, he felt not just hope, but certainty. The journey they had started together at the auction was far from over. The hardest test still lay ahead, and he would face it side by side with a horse no one else had believed in. The fairgrounds pulsed with noise and color, a swirl of banners, music, and restless animals. Children darted between stalls clutching sweets, vendors shouted their wares, and the air smelled of hay, dust, and roasted corn. Beneath the lively chaos, he felt the familiar tightening in his chest. He had come prepared, yet nerves gnawed as he guided the trailer through the crowd toward the arena. At the wheel, his knuckles whitened, but behind him, in the small trailer, rested the horse that had carried him through doubt and ridicule. Today, they faced the judgment of the world. He parked at the edge of the field, cut the engine, and sat still for a moment, listening to the thrum of life outside. When he finally opened the trailer, the tiny horse blinked into the sunlight. Its coat, once dull and lifeless, gleamed now, brushed until it caught the day's glow. Though smaller than any competitor here, it stepped carefully down the ramp, ears flicking with curiosity rather than fear. He exhaled slowly. That simple confidence was already a victory. Around them, other horses drew attention, massive stallions with rippling muscles, mares prancing with polished manes and braided tails. Their owners preened, boasting of lineage and training. Laughter rippled when some caught sight of the tiny horse. "That's no competitor," one man said, shaking his head. "Why bother bringing that runt here?" Another chuckled. Maybe he thought it was a petting zoo. The words pressed against him like stones, but he kept walking. He had heard worse, and so had the horse. They had survived mockery before. He reached down, brushing his hand along the horse's neck. "Ignore them," he murmured. "We're not here for them. We're here to show what you are." The announcer's voice echoed over the loudspeaker, calling contestants into the ring. The line of competitors filed toward the gates, towering animals gleaming with preparation. He guided the tiny horse to the end of the line, heart pounding. Every step into the arena felt heavier, the crowd's murmurs sharpening with curiosity. Children pointed, adults exchanged smirks. He caught a glimpse of the judges' table, raised brows, skeptical eyes, pens poised as though already dismissing. The performance began. One by one, the larger horses trotted with practiced grace, muscles rippling under bright saddles. Applause followed each display, polite or enthusiastic depending on polish. He watched, waiting, feeling the weight of expectation build until the announcer finally called his name. Silence swept the crowd as the tiny horse stepped forward. The laughter returned, soft at first, then spreading. Some shook their heads, others leaned forward as though expecting a spectacle of failure. He blocked it out, focusing instead on the horse beside him. It moved with hesitation at first, hooves clicking softly against the packed earth, but then, as if sensing the weight of the moment, its stride steadied. Its head lifted, ears forward, eyes alert. He guided it into the center, voice low, gestures calm. The horse responded, turning neatly, stopping on cue, trotting a small circle. It was not powerful, not dazzling, but it was precise, steady, and filled with quiet determination. The laughter dulled. Murmurs rippled as people leaned closer. Something in the horse's bearing, fragile yet resolute, demanded attention. He whispered encouragement with every step. "Good, that's it, you're doing it." The horse's trust was absolute now. It followed his lead, as though tethered by more than rope. Together, they performed the routine they had practiced under sunrise and starlight, each movement a testament to survival and perseverance. By the time they finished, the arena had fallen into near silence. The crowd no longer laughed. Instead, eyes followed the small horse with something like wonder. A child clapped tentatively, then another, until applause spread across the stands. It was not thunderous, not the roar reserved for champions, but it was genuine, born of surprise and respect. He stood in the center, heart pounding, unable to hold back the swell of emotion. It was not about winning ribbons or titles. It was about standing here at all, about proving that the horse once discarded as worthless had found strength worth honoring. He bowed his head slightly toward the judges, then led the horse back toward the gate. As he passed, he caught sight of familiar faces, the same neighbors who had mocked him, now silent, their expressions softened with something like shame. One man nodded faintly, a gesture of reluctant respect. It was more than he expected and more than he needed. In the quiet of the holding area, he knelt beside the horse, resting his forehead gently against its mane. "You did it," he whispered. The horse exhaled, warm breath brushing against his shoulder. For a moment, the noise of the fair faded, and it was only the two of them, bound by everything they had endured together. When the judges' results were announced later, he scarcely heard them. They had not placed high, nor won medals. But applause rose again when the announcer noted the smallest competitor of the day, recognized for spirit and resilience. To him, that acknowledgement was more valuable than any ribbon. The sun began its slow descent, casting long golden rays over the fairgrounds as he loaded the horse back into the trailer. The day had left him drained, yet lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted. He had feared humiliation, yet instead found vindication, not in victory, but in the simple act of showing the world what he had always known. On the drive home, he glanced into the rearview mirror. The tiny horse stood steady now, not cowering, not collapsed, but balanced and calm. It was a picture of endurance, a symbol of quiet triumph. His chest tightened, not with worry this time, but with pride. Night settled by the time they reached the farm. He opened the trailer, guiding the horse back into the barn. The air was cool, filled with the scent of hay and the distant chirp of crickets. He led it to the stall, where it settled easily into familiar straw. He lingered, unwilling to leave too soon, watching the creature that had changed not only its own fate, but his as well. He thought back to the auction, the jeers, the hopeless figure nearly collapsing under the weight of neglect. That broken creature had become something no one expected. In helping the horse find its strength, he had uncovered his own. Before leaving the barn, he whispered once more, his voice steady and sure. "You were never too small. You were never too weak. You just needed someone to believe." The horse flicked its ears, eyes soft, as though it understood. He turned down the lantern, letting darkness settle gently over them both. Outside, the world would go on, neighbors with their judgments, fairs with their champions, but within these walls lived a story of resilience that no ridicule could erase. And as he stepped into the cool night, stars blossoming across the sky, he felt a quiet certainty. Their journey was only beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound not by size or strength, but by trust and the refusal to give up. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.